Good morning, folks. Today, John Mackey here with Give Me Credit, and we're going to talk about financial education, who teaches it, who doesn't, and who pays the price. So, welcome to Give Me Credit. I'm John Mackey, writer of Credit Genius on Substack and host of my podcast called Incognito. I've been a longtime advocate of credit literacy and, in general, a longtime advocate. I'm joined by my co-host, J.S. Waldo. How are you, J.S.?
I'm doing good, John. Thanks.
Good. Now, J.S. is a former mortgage underwriter with more than 30 years of experience and the writer of Mortgage Lending Explained on Substack. Together, we work to bring clarity and knowledge to all things credit. J.S., we've been talking a while, and you brought up this topic the other day. So let's get into it. What's going on?
Well, the topic I brought up is about financial education. And hi, everyone. I came across an article a couple weeks ago. I think you remember this, John, and I shared it on Substack. I actually put it into notes because I thought it was so important. The state of Minnesota, which floors me, now requires a personal finance course to graduate from high school. That's just amazing. This started with students. This is going to start with students. It actually started this year.
Yeah.
In ninth grade, the ones who came in the 24-25 school year in ninth grade, they will not graduate unless they complete a dedicated personal finance class. And the class talks over things like budgeting, taxes, credit, insurance, investing, real life skills.
Yeah.
This isn't optional for them anymore. It's written into state law. Now, before this, you and I both know financial education was scattered inside like the mandatory economic class. And even then, only mentioned briefly. Now it's a full credit course. Students are talking about Roth IRAs and insurance deductibles in high school. That's a big deal. It won't fully affect students until around the class of 28 because they don't have to, it's not mandatory unless they want to graduate, which gives schools in Minnesota time to really build that curriculum rather than throw something together. But this is a shift. This is financial literacy. It just moved from nice to have to required. So I've been thinking about it a lot.
Yeah. The thing that concerns me is, first of all, I'm from the state of Minnesota. I'm familiar with the advent of this class. I think my issue has been with all of these companies, or not companies, but educational platforms, that they're going to start off with chapter 4. They say they're going to talk about credit, maybe how to get credit, but they're not going to be talking about credit reports or things of that nature. And that part concerns me. So we can talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a concern of mine. And in fact, that school that you were talking about is up in my school district.
Oh, wow.
I found amazing. Not because we're backwards here. Certainly we're not. We're a very progressive area. But so it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I just hope they go beyond IRAs, Roths, 401ks, things of that nature, and getting into chapter 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, I don't know if there's a way to have input on a curriculum, but maybe you need to offer up your services. It leads me to questions as well, like kind of the emotion and the philosophy behind credit education. John, where did you learn about money?
I didn't. Probably the first place is similar to sex. You never learn about it. And I learned, I guess, by watching my dad. My dad grew up during the Depression, and because of an illness for my grandfather, he had to be the man of the house back during the Depression. And he grew up in it. And he was a penny pincher down. He was a miser. Loved the man, but he was a miser. And he had a ledger, and everything he spent was put on that ledger, whether it was a penny at a gumball machine, or major items that he purchased. So that's where I got my first kind of, I don't want to say indoctrination. The second time, my first year out of high school, I went to the University of Minnesota.
Mhm.
And from there, I was drafted into the Army, and then I went into the Army, and then I had a free place to stay. So I really didn't hit me then until I came home one time. And I bought a car, paid cash, drove it back to where I was stationed, which was Virginia. And within 2 weeks, I fooled my dad. I traded that car in for a motorcycle. He was not pleased. And the first time he heard about it was when I drove the motorcycle back home. Traveling 1,500 miles on a bike is a long trip. But
Yeah.
anyway, I had to get a loan for it. That's where I started. And believe it or not, even back then, I had to get a cosigner on it because I had no credit.
Yep.
And that's initially where I learned about it. Certainly setting up a house when you get married, and I got married young at 22, and you're going to learn real fast then.
Yep, that's true.
And that's kind of where things started.
I was very lucky in that, I mean, don't get me wrong in any way. I was raised very poor. But my dad spoke openly, and finances were spoken very openly about in my house, around the dinner table. When you're young, you just kind of hear the conversations. But as I got older, I was brought into the conversations. My mother didn't like that. This was not something that you talk to a teenager about, whatever. But my dad was like, whatever, I'm doing it anyway. And I'm grateful for that because I grew up truly understanding finances. I'll never forget one time he gave me an assignment. I just remembered this. He gave me an assignment. I told him that I didn't want to live there anymore and it was time for me to move out. I was 15. And he said, okay. I said, do you think I could do it? He said, well, do I think you're smart enough to do it? Most likely, but let's be real. Let's do something real. You go find a job in the newspaper right now that you're qualified for because you're 15 and how much it's going to pay you, and write me out a total budget. At the same time, you're going to go find a place that you're going to go rent. You're going to have the entire spectrum. You have to have health insurance. You have to have that. He gave me the whole list, and I understood my assignment, and I went and I completed that assignment. And he laughed when I turned in my assignment to my dad. He laughed because, of course, you find those jobs. I'm 15 that they promise the world, and you're going to make $1,000. I mean, I'm dating myself here. You're going to make $1,000 a month.
Right.
At that time, to do something like that, it was probably some sales commission job, and this is just what they were promising. So he giggled at that part because you didn't have to have experience. They'll train you. But the rest of it I did. And he was like, wow, you even thought about this, or you even thought about this. Well, I said, yeah, you have to eat, you have to have car insurance. I had already bought my car at 15. I paid cash. I had saved money from this little job I had gotten. And for me, it was such a valuable lesson
Yeah.
And for him, it showed him that I was thinking about money correctly. From there, our financial discussions blossomed. It turns out that I'm pretty good with numbers, and I don't know, we had great conversations. We would watch the market news together, and we would talk about what was going on in the world and what affected this and what affected that. And it was beautiful. So I really feel like I was lucky because school didn't teach this stuff, but in my head, I felt like I learned a lot, and I really give all the credit to my dad.
You know, as you were talking there, I'm concentrating on what you're saying, and what popped into my mind was this time when I was in the military. And it would have been 1977 at that time. I was stationed at Wheaton College in their ROTC department,
Mhm.
making relatively good money for a military guy living off base. But I had this dream. I wanted this one car, this Corvette. Everybody dreams of those back then, what I could do, and I saw it, and then I saw the payments on it, and I thought, John, if you have oatmeal for breakfast and a can of soup for lunch and a can of soup for dinner, you can do it. And then I thought, John, you ignorant, whatever. You can't live like that. You'll hate the car after that. And so
Mhm.
I never got it. But that's what
Yeah.
brought up that thought. Now, getting back to the school, but what do
Uh-huh.
you think absolutely must be taught in a class like this?
Oh, well, I think it has to be practical. I think you need real numbers. You need to look at real bank statements. You need to look at real credit reports.
Yeah,
I think primarily my thought process when it comes to financial education, a class like this, is don't make it theory. Don't talk in theory. Not a glossary, not definitions. Like make it real. I think students need to see what an overdraft looks like, what happens when you miss even one payment, what
yeah,
an insurance deductible actually means, when you have to pay it.
right.
There has to be, with money, there has to be, I believe, an emotional component. Money is trust, money is fear, money is survival. And that's something I didn't fully understand until I started teaching adults.
Wait a minute. So you were teaching adults?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. When I way back in the day, again, I'm dating myself here, I managed a mortgage department in a small little community bank in Phoenix.
Was this in
Part
the 1800s?
of Yes, it
Sorry.
was.
I
Yes, it
you,
was.
you forced me into it. Okay.
We dealt with rocks.
Okay.
Part of my job was community outreach. That was a big
Okay.
thing back then.
Yeah, makes sense.
I partnered with like housing departments in the different cities. I partnered with grant programs. There was actually a lot of grant programs for underserved communities. And again, remember, I was on the mortgage side of it. But I learned very quickly that you can't just get out there when you're working with these groups and start with mortgages. Before we could talk about buying a home, we had to back way up and we had to talk about a checking account. And what does a checking account do?
So who were you teaching?
Well, we were working with primarily adult Spanish immigrants,
Okay.
low income communities. I focused on the low income communities. There were some young adults, but a lot of it was just older people. They were older than me at the time, and that was surprising. But basically, people who there was a lot of that genuinely didn't trust commercial banks. That I learned that they kept cash at home because they believed once they deposited it, it wasn't theirs anymore.
Really?
Yeah, so we started at the beginning. I think I went out there with these grand thoughts, hey, let me teach you about a mortgage. And I learned, no, we're going to back way up. What's a bank? What's a credit union? What's an overdraft? How do you balance a checkbook? What are property taxes? What is homeowners insurance?
Sure.
What's a deductible for your homeowner's insurance? We weren't building wealth yet. We were building understanding.
You were building a foundation for that.
Yep.
Okay. So what shocked you the most?
I think what shocked me the most when I look back on that was how many people desperately wanted to learn. These classes, I would teach them at night. You know, when people got off work, I would teach it on the weekends. I would basically, whatever the partner I was working with at the time, the city, the realtor, community group, whatever they felt was better for their community, in order to allow them to attend,
Yeah.
I would do it. I was always different hours, different places. People would bring their kids, and sometimes it was because they didn't have a babysitter. They couldn't
Sure.
afford a babysitter or whatever. Sometimes it was because their kids could speak English and they needed a translator.
Ah,
But sometimes it was because they wanted their kids to learn too. They had heard about these classes through, other ones, through
Sure.
word of mouth. Whole families would show up. And that's when I realized something. If the parents were never taught, how could they then teach their teenagers?
right, right.
So I spent a lot of time on questions and answers. There were so many questions.
Yeah.
I tried to give them what they needed.
In your experience, do you think people distrust banks or just don't understand them?
My experience told me and taught me that it was both. It
Yeah.
went both ways. There were actually cultural reasons why a lot of them didn't, for the distrust in a bank. Some came from countries where banks were unstable or outright corrupt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Others just simply had no exposure. They didn't understand what a bank did, how it worked, what it was for. You can't expect someone to use a system that they don't understand.
Yeah, and you've also got prior history from prior generations. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking of my dad, back during the Depression when banks failed and people lost money.
Right.
That carries it with you. So what about credit? What was the biggest misconception?
In the beginning, credit wasn't even the main issue. It really was the basics. Because what I learned was, I thought that would be the main thing. But what I learned was that most people understood the concept of buying something and paying later. This was already happening in their communities, literally at their community level. But what they didn't understand was the access to mainstream credit, like a credit card. How does that work? Interest. They didn't understand things like, how does a mortgage work? Literally, they didn't feel like they would own a property if they had a mortgage on it. To them, it wasn't theirs.
Right.
The question I heard constantly was, you still hear it today. You mentioned it, John. How do I get approved for credit if I don't have a credit history?
Right, right.
That was something I was actually working on. That's why I was out there. How can I help the underserved communities get credit? That became a driving force for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you think, or do you think the system failed them?
100% yes. But not just them. The system has failed, still failing, except Minnesota's kicking in, anyone who isn't taught. I was lucky. My father talked openly, as we said. I was so into it, and numbers made so much sense to me. When I went into college, I was immediately into accounting. It just all worked. I was lucky. But see, I didn't see the gap back then because I didn't live in that gap.
Sure.
So teaching those classes changed me. Financial education is not only about becoming a savvy investor and getting rich. That's not what it's about. You may get there. There's nothing wrong with those classes later, but the level I'm talking about is survival.
Absolutely.
It's survival, it's dignity, it's about understanding and having options. It's about learning the basics.
Right.
So when I see, I saw that when I came across this article for the state of Minnesota requiring it in high school, I felt like maybe we're finally admitting as a society that this basic financial education matters.
Yeah. So if Minnesota is doing this statewide, do you think this is the beginning of a larger shift?
Well, I'm pretty positive person, and I'm going to tell you that I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. You and I,
Right.
we talk about credit scores. We talk about mortgages. We talk about interest rates and inflation. Even in your news post that you do, you give us the news every single week, incognito, all of it. But underneath all that is one simple question. Did anyone ever teach you how money works?
No.
And that matters. I think that really matters. Minnesota is saying that question shouldn't be left to chance anymore. It's that important. Not because every student is going to become an investor and not because everyone's going to go out and buy a home right away. It matters, in my opinion, it matters because understanding how a checking account works, what an overdraft fee is, what an insurance deductible is, those are survival skills in modern life. When I taught those classes in Phoenix, I wasn't trying to create millionaires. I was trying to give people confidence. I may have started thinking I'm going to get out there and figure out what everybody needs and write mortgage programs, which I did, by the way.
Right.
But what I ended up trying to do was remove fear from the equation by sharing this education. So I feel like if high school students can graduate already knowing just the basics, already understanding credit, already understanding even taxes, that changes their starting line. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
And I think that where you start matters.
That's a real powerful point.
Yeah, I mean, you and I, we go out of our way to teach, right? Financial literacy should depend on whether your parents talked about money at the dinner table. It should be foundational, I feel. So yeah, I think every state should be looking at this because the cost of not teaching, it's something I've seen up close. And it's expensive and it affects their entire lives.
Well said, JS. Well said.
Well, I wanted to talk about this topic because that's why we do this podcast, John, you and I. We're trying to bring clarity. We're trying to make this less intimidating. We're trying to help people ask better questions about credit and money. So if you're listening, think about this. Where did you learn about money? And if you have kids or grandkids, are they learning it now?
That's all for today's episode of Give Me Credit. If you found this conversation helpful, please feel free to share it. Speak to us, talk to us. Let us know what your questions are. Because if we don't have the questions, it's up to us to provide the answers. And you need to start sharing your questions with us. It's a difficult topic. It's not hard to understand, but you've got to open the door. Remember, you can follow JS at jswaldo.substack.com, or you can follow me, my Substack, at creditgenius.substack. Subscribe to both. You're not going to want to miss a thing we say. Thank you for listening to Give Me Credit. JS, thank you very much.
You're welcome,
and we'll
John.
See you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for the conversation, John.
Absolutely.